Hello, welcome to Gen Z Finance. I'm an older Gen Z here on YouTube documenting my financial journey. I usually do this by using YNAB or You Need a Budget, which is what you see up here on the screen now, and running through my biweekly budgets, monthly spending, and savings reviews, and net worth updates. I also have a couple of videos on my channel relating to my financial independence journey and the specifics on how, where, and what I invest in. So if you are interested in any of that, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons down below to follow. Today's video is part of a series of videos prepping for 2021 and closing out my 2020 budget. I already posted a video showing how I plan out my rough annual budget and some of the basic financial goals that I'm going to be working towards, so please make sure to check that video out if you haven't already. But this video is part one on how I am changing and updating my budget in YNAB for the new year. In today's video, we will review why and when you might decide to start fresh and create a new budget in YNAB. I will also walk you through what my new category and group structure will be and a couple of changes on how I will be budgeting in the future months. So if you've seen any of my previous bi-weekly budget with me's, you are pretty familiar with my current setup in YNAB. Even though I've only been sharing my budgets for the past 6 months or so, I have had the same basic structure practically since I've started YNAB in February of 2019, plus or minus a couple of now hidden categories. But for the most part, my categories, accounts, and how I handle budgeting has been pretty consistent, and more importantly, it has worked very well for me. I often think of 2019 and 2020 as one chapter, in fact, the first chapter of my financial journey. I went from the beginning of 2019, still not having a job after graduating in December of 2018, and having only $23 in my savings account, to temping at my first full-time job, then getting a small pay raise and becoming a permanent employee, to then getting a new job with a huge pay increase in March of 2020. And during all of this, I paid off $28,000 in student loans. So that's why, in my mind, these 2 years represent a very specific point of my life. And while my budget as it is now has gotten me to this point, I think I've outgrown this budget a bit. Now, I could keep this budget and just hide and rearrange categories as needed to reflect my new reality, but I would really like to bookend this chapter in my life and almost preserve and archive this budget as is so that I can always refer back to it, and it can be almost like a snapshot of what my life was like during those 2 years. And this is just another reason why I love YNAB, because they let you have as many budgets as you want, and you can always refer back to an old budget and review the reports and data. So once you've decided that you no longer want to actively use your old budget, there are two main ways to start a new one. The first option is to make a fresh start, and the second option is to just create a new budget entirely. Either way, all of your old data is kept fresh and safe. You can always go back to your old budget if you find you don't really like the new one. So with a fresh start, all of your account names, scheduled transactions, goals, notes, payees, and of course your budget categories are going to be there on your new budget. However, none of your old transactions, account balances, or budget data comes over. So this makes rearranging your categories easier and faster since you already have your old structure to work with. So when you create a new budget, this will be like when you first started YNAB again for the first time. It will take you to the basic starting template that YNAB recommends, and then you must change everything from there as needed. I will leave links down below in the description box for more info on the difference between the two. For this video, I will be doing a new budget just because it gives me a bit more control on what data I actually want tracked in this new budget. So I'm going to start and press new budget. My budget name will be 2021 personal budget, and then everything will stay as it is, and then I will hit create budget. So ta-da! YNAB just created this brand new budget for me, and like I said, it is just the template version that they provide. Now, the great thing about YNAB is, again, this is completely customizable. So they give you this to give you an idea and to give you a sense of how they recommend you structure your budget. But for me, I will actually be using a lot of the same structure and categories I had in my previous budget with just a couple of changes thrown in there. So I will start making changes by setting up my master category group names. I'll walk you through the first few together and then come back once I have the rest completed. So I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this immediate obligations to my responsibilities. Okay. And then I'm going to rename this True Expenses Master Category Group to Monthly Varied. And again, I'm going to add a calendar here. All right, so then I'm going to go through the rest of these on my own, and I'll come back to you in a second once this is done. So here are my main category groups. There are 7 of them in total. You can see I did add emojis to all of them, and these emojis, some of them are just decorative, but some of them are actually functional as well. So the master groups that have a calendar at the end of them, these first 4, will be the categories I fund in future months. So under each of these master groups, all of those categories will be funded at least 1 month in advance. Next, I'll go ahead and populate the individual categories under each of these groups. So I will walk you through the first few like we did before, and then come back once everything else is fully completed. And we're going to start under the My Responsibilities master group and change this to. So in my old budget, I actually had a master group called Responsibilities to Mom, which we can see here in my previous budget, with 4 separate category lines that I would use to split out the $400 that I send to her every month. But that was all a very arbitrary distinction, and it didn't really provide me any great insight to my spending when I reviewed my reports. So now all of this spending, that $400, is now just going to be in this one line. The second line in here is going to be for my monthly subscriptions. So similar to this category for my bills to mom, with these 2 subscriptions categories, I'm actually going to be condensing several categories that I had in my old budget into just 1 or 2 line items. So in my old budget, you can see here I had a whole master group for all of my subscriptions. And this was really helpful to me my first couple of years, especially when I had a lot more subscriptions, and I needed to keep an eye on these to make sure I wasn't spending too much on subscriptions every month. But now I actually have a really good sense on what my average monthly cost is and have pared the number of subscriptions down quite significantly. I no longer need that drawn out group and can just use the notes section here to list out the specific due dates and costs of the individual subscriptions. Now I will be filling out the rest of my budget with all my true categories. So I will see you back here in a second. JK, this did not actually take me 2 hours. I have now finished setting up my budget. So I have 32 main categories. Again, most of these were in my old budget, so I won't talk about all of them. I'll only focus on the ones that there were any big changes in. And we've already discussed the My Responsibilities, which was one of the categories that had the most change happening to it. Another change is the creation of this giving category group here. So this blue heart donations for $20, that is my monthly set donations, and that used to be underneath my monthly varied, but it is now under this new group, as is my gifts and family giving, which used to be under my sinking funds. In fact, family giving is the new name for my quote unquote dad fund, where I save money to help my dad out in case he needs it. But I wanted to make this more broad for any family members who might need some extra cash so that I can help them out. So that's why it's now being renamed as Family Giving, but this was a category that used to be under sinking funds. And then Random Acts of Kindness is a brand new category to better track giving that is not directly to a charity or cause. So if I give cash to someone on the street or Venmo a friend $5 to $10 because they need a little pick-me-up, I will be tracking that transaction here. I used to track it under this monthly giving, but I figured this Random Acts of Kindness was a better way to categorize that. And then for my sinking funds category, which will retain the name Winter is Coming, which is a reference to Game of Thrones, a lot of this is pretty much the same. There might just be some differences in what I am setting aside for each category every month. I've also added this @ZennialFinance finance line, which is my Instagram handle if you want to follow me. And this will help me track my business expenses I have for this channel, like for the giveaway I'll be doing when I reach 500 subscribers. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons down below so I can hit that milestone and put some spending in this category. So next we have my F.I.R.E group, where I track all of my investments. So the group name is the fire emoji, and then in parentheses you have and blood, and again that is another reference to Game of Thrones if you don't know. Nothing much is changing here except I will now be funding my Roth IRA 1 month in advance as opposed to only funding it as I get paid with each paycheck like I do now. And so that's why there's that little calendar next to the Roth IRA, because this specific category line will get funded 1 month in advance. My brokerage line item has no set monthly contribution, but I expect to put most of my part-time job paychecks here to be invested. All right, now it's time to talk about one of my favorite groups. It's my savings. So the first three lines here are pretty much my event emergency funds. So by that, I mean that in the event of a car, medical, or other unforeseen emergency, I have money set aside for all of these. Now, this 1 month buffer is a new category I added because for 2021, I'm going to change up how I budget into the future. If you are a returning subscriber, you know that I budget 2 months ahead for most of my expenses. Generally, it's those category groups that I have now designated here with the calendar in the master group. So it's these four category groups that I usually budget 2 months ahead of. So when I get my first paycheck in, let's say, January, I would flip forward into March and budget for half of the expenses and categories in the first four groups, and then come back to January and budget the rest of my paycheck into the current month for my savings or investing. So I just do the same thing with the second paycheck of the month and then rinse and repeat for the rest of the year. So that's how I've been budgeting ahead for all of 2020. This strategy really worked for me for a long time, especially when I was paying off debt, and it allowed me to feel secure paying off lots of debt each month, knowing that my minimums and basic spending were already covered for the next 2 months. However, once I became officially debt free in September of 2020 and began adding new savings and sinking fund categories, being 2 months ahead almost became more of a hassle. For instance, if I open up my sinking funds, when I added my travel category underneath my sinking funds in September, I was already budgeting for the rest of my sinking funds for November. In order to have my travel category caught up, quote unquote, caught up, I would either need to not fund it in YNAB for the month of September or October and just start budgeting for it for the month of November, or I would have needed to somehow cover the monthly contribution for all of September, October, and November for it to be fully caught up with my other sinking funds. Long story short, budgeting directly into the future by 2 months made me less flexible when it came to adding or removing categories. However, I still really like to budget ahead, especially when I get a paycheck. I like to just immediately budget that money out. I can't just put that money in a line item and wait until the first of every month to budget that. Like, that will not work for me. So I do want to continue to budget ahead. So in order to do that for 2021, I am only going to budget ahead 1 month for, again, those groups designated by the calendar. So that's the first four here. And then underneath my F.I.R.E category, my Roth IRA. This will allow me to be more flexible and reactive when changes in my budget happen and I need to add or remove categories. I can do that a lot more easily. But since I am currently 2 months ahead, I will just be parking 1 month's buffer, which comes out to about $1,500 right here in this savings line item, the 1 month buffer. This will allow me to still remain 2 months ahead, but now if I add a new category at any time, I'll only really have to worry about funding it for the next month instead of the next 2 months. I will still have my categories for saving for next year's medical deductibles and for a car replacement. And then the last category here is my holding line. Y'all know I had to keep this category. It is one of my favorite categories to have in my budget. However, I do hope to be a bit more intentional with any extra cash flow I have during the month, so I shouldn't be using this category too much or budgeting as much into it as I do currently in 2020. I talked a bit about being more intentional in the video linked up above where I planned out my rough annual budget, so check that out if you want to hear more about my thoughts. But whenever I have leftover money that I'm not sure what to do with, I can go ahead and move that money into this holding line item. And then at the end of every quarter, I will force myself to redistribute and budget this money into other categories and treat this as a bit of a quarterly bonus. But again, hopefully this category doesn't get too big because I would like to use most of my cash flow for either other cash savings, extra investing into my brokerage account, or maybe a wish farm item. So I did want to talk about one last group, and I'm going to unhide it now. And this last group is probably my weirdest and most unique category in my budget. It is called Immortality Becomes You, which is a reference and a direct quote from Twilight, hence why there's a little vampire and then a sparkle emoji here. And the whole point of this category is to encourage healthy behavior. So the idea here is that if I keep up my healthy habits, I will be immortal. Like, that's totally how that works, right? You just live forever if you're healthy enough. So in this category, I have the line where I track any unallowed Pepsi consumption. I've talked and explained about this category before, but pretty much anytime I grab a Pepsi from the fridge, I need to send my mom $5 because I'm trying to break an addiction to Pepsi. And this category helped me so much in 2020. I went from at least 2 Pepsis a day to only having, I think, 1 or 2 in the past 3 to 4 months. So, inspired by that success, I created this Walk Forest Walk category because I have a goal to walk or participate in some other physical activity at least 4 times a week. Before COVID, I was going to the gym every single day for months, and then when COVID hit and gym shut down, I really lost motivation to continue to work out and be active. And I've had some success throughout the quarantine. I would do really good for a couple of weeks and then I would fall off the bandwagon. So, this category will helpfully motivate me to be a bit more consistent with my activity, because if at the end of the week I didn't reach this goal of 4 times a week of physical activity, I will need to take money out of either a wish form item or my fun category or somewhere else in my budget and pay a penalty for not hitting the goal. The idea being here is that the penalty will motivate me to continue to be active, just like the penalty for grabbing a Pepsi curbed my desire for them. So, for the most part, hopefully, this category group, the Immortality Becomes You, will remain hidden because that means I've met my activity goals and haven't cheated and grabbed a Pepsi. And again, the healthier I am, the longer I'll live, theoretically, hopefully, knock on wood. So, we're going to hide it here. Now, I do have a couple of other categories that I set up and have already hidden, and they mostly have to do with my wish farm and wish list, and they don't currently impact my budget, so that's why they're hidden. I'm not currently saving for any of them. I'm toying with the idea of making a separate video going more in detail about wish farms, how I handle and organize mine, because I actually don't use YNAB's classifications of small, medium, and large. To me, it's just not very helpful, so I have my own setup for that. So let me know down below if you would be interested in that video. All right, so that is my main budget, and that covers everything I wanted to talk about in today's video. So part 2 of this setup series will cover how to add goals for each category and kind of walk through the goals that YNAB gives you and how you can use them for each different type of category that you may have. In part 3, I will be adding all of my accounts and budgeting out my starting balances into my budget. So that video should be coming out in the last few days of 2020 because I need to wait until most of my spending or all of my spending for 2020 is finished so that I have accurate ending balances of my checking and savings account for 2020, and those will then be my starting balances for my budget starting in 2021. So hopefully that made sense. And then make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and let me know in a comment as well if you will be making any changes to your YNAB budget for 2021 and how are you going to implement those changes. So I hope y'all are staying safe and healthy as always, and that you have a good rest of the day, week, month, and year.